Alright, so I've asked you to kind of reflect on where you're at right now in the semester. And the reason for that, again, to reiterate what we talked about earlier, is it's really important moving into Chapter 6 and so forth, as well as your case study project, that you have a very strong foundation to build from. So, did everybody find it useful to spend about an hour doing that? Again, nobody speaks.
I didn't hear. I'm so sorry. We're trying to upload.
Did everybody find it useful to spend an hour kind of reflecting on where they stand?
Yeah.
Did anybody not find it useful? Did anything you write down surprise you? Maybe a little bit? Alright, so let's look at some of them. And I'm not so concerned about what you feel comfortable with at this point. Need to improve on distinguishing types of windows and doors and walls. So where would we, if we went into Revit, where would we find that information? It's right here, the properties dialog box, right? So if I click on a wall, it's going to tell me what that wall is. This is the type selector, right? We should be good with that concept at this point. So I can change that wall by essentially changing the type of wall. If I clicked on a window, same thing. It would tell me what type of window it is, and I could change that window by clicking on the down arrow and going to the type selector. Does that make sense? Now, what wall to use, or what window to use, or what door to use is really a design choice. And we will get into further customizing those elements as we move through the course of the semester. So if you're thinking, I really want to know how to create a custom wall type, we'll get there, and you'll be able to actually create your very own assembly of a wall. It has a stud here, it has gypsum board here, it has an air barrier here, so on and so forth. And we've looked at that a little bit when we've edited the structure. I think in Chapter 2 we sloped a floor to a drain. Right? Did we do that already?
No.
Okay. Maybe that's Chapter 6 and I'm recalling last semester. I apologize. I've built this building a couple times. Alright, so let's go back to... Not sure what temporary dimensions are helpful in. So if we go back to Revit, what are temporary dimensions good for?
Changing the dimensions of the wall.
Yeah, I think you can think of temporary dimensions as a drawing tool. So if I click on this wall and I get a temporary dimension here that says 27 feet 8 1/4 inches, what I can really do is use that to draw now. I can move this wall. So if I said, hey, this needs to be 25 feet clear, I'm using that dimension to accurately input information. That's pretty much in a nutshell what temporary dimensions do, but they will become second nature to you, or they should become second nature to you as you draw with them. I'm going to undo that. I have no clue how to edit wall joints or place openings. Alright, these are two separate items. Wall joints. This is kind of a weird tool, right? If you go up to modify, you have this little tool right here that says wall joints. And all this does is change the way that Revit graphically represents how the walls come together. So if I click here and I roll over a wall joint, you'll see a window comes up. As I click on that, it's going to give me some options. This is a butt joint, so obviously you see the lines bring it together as a butt joint. If I go to miter, it's going to put a line in there that represents that the wall's been mitered. If I go to square off, it goes back to something similar to a butt joint. What's the real use of this tool?
If you're joining two walls of different materials, isn't it important in that case?
It's basically graphical in nature. It shows how those two pieces may come together. I will tell you, I don't use the wall joint tool a whole lot. Someplace I do use the wall joint tool is like here. If I don't want this joint to look continuous, I may say disallow joint, and then I might come in here and manipulate this and show that the exterior wall gets built first, then the interior wall gets built up to the exterior wall. It's really kind of a graphical thing to show that this really isn't framed this way. Again, not a tool that I use a whole lot. There's other ways to edit what that joint looks like. And we'll cover that when we cover detail lines. What was the second thing? Place openings. Alright, so a wall opening is like a door without a door in it. So you can go to the architecture tab here, and there's openings. And there's shaft openings, that's for a floor. We'll talk about those in chapter 6. I think we will talk about this in chapter 6. But there's also wall openings. And essentially what you're doing, it's going to be difficult to show you here, is you're creating an opening in there that has properties now. The advantage of doing it this way instead of drawing two walls is what? I can edit the opening and it will change automatically. It has properties. So this says the top offset is 2 feet, the bottom offset is 0 feet. So this opening is 8 feet tall because it's in a 10-foot wall. And to prove the point that it is, we'll just drop in an elevation here. So how many of you have like an arched opening in your house? Yeah, a lot of us have like arched openings. This would be a good tool for that. You could also edit your wall profile, but it gets a little bit messy if you want to move that opening if you edit the wall profile. A lot of times in walls, we may have an opening for a window that's smaller, but there's no glass in it. It's just a framed opening, an opening for a bar, an opening for a mechanical duct or something to go through. So just think of these as a void in your wall that you can manipulate. And you can either manipulate that using the temporary dimensions here, or you can manipulate it by clicking and dragging on the blue grips. I don't recommend that you do it by clicking and dragging on the blue grips. Why? It's not very precise, and we want to be as precise as possible in Revit. All right.
So on that openings, can you also use in your geometry the cut command for that?
I'm sorry, here in modify, which tool?
On the geometry, there's a cut command. Can you then create?
Well, that tool is used to cut from a solid. It's a way to create an opening, but it's not as dynamic. Meaning it's not as easy to edit after the fact.
Okay. So when would you use that?
Cut? When I was creating custom geometry for a mass or something like that, very early in the conceptual stage.
Something you need him in.
Yeah. A typical wall opening, I would use the opening tool for.
So if you were to split the element, would that opening end up going all the way to the ceiling?
If you were to split the element like this wall,
Yeah, and then just move the wall.
yeah, that would essentially turn this into two different walls. All right, so if I move this over here, and I go back and look at this elevation, it's now two separate walls. Now, could I come in and edit the profile and do something like this? I certainly could, but this is still two separate entities. And it's going to treat it like two separate entities. And that may not be a problem for a view like this, but if I was going to render this view, and I applied material to it, and I wanted that material to look seamless across both pieces, it could be an issue. So, as with anything in Revit, are there multiple ways to get it done? Absolutely. It just depends on which way you're most familiar with. And I'll tell you, when I first started using Revit, I don't recall using the wall opening tool a lot, but now I use it actually quite often because it's dynamic. I just like the fact it's dynamic. If I click on this, it's not easy to change the height of this opening, is it? I gotta go back to edit profile, and then I gotta move this. I bring it back out of sketch mode. And now if it's not perfectly lined up, I have this issue. On the list. Array command is not coming to me second nature. Confuse it with AutoCAD. Yeah, that can be a problem, right? If you're an AutoCAD user, I've warned you all along that it can be frustrating making that transition to Revit. And there are things that work a little bit different. The rotate command's a little bit different. Array is a little bit different. I think the things to remember about array. Let's go to level 1. I think the most difficult things about array, at least in my opinion, are remembering how to set it up. So it's one of the tools that is very important that you look at the options bar when you're using. So for example, if I drop a window in here, and I want to array this window, I come up here to the array command. This stuff all matters a whole lot, right? I think move to second and move to last seems to be the thing that is most confusing for people. Move to second basically means you're going to define the space in between each element. Move to last means you're going to define the start and end of the entire array, and then Revit's going to automatically fill it in. So let's just look at this. If I type in 10 here, and I say move to second, I click here and I say, hey, I want that to be 8 feet. My array is going to be like 80 feet long, right? And it's going to cut a whole bunch of windows in there, and you're going to see the number 10. Now, does it care about the start and stop of this? No, it's putting a fixed space between each element. If I undo that, hit escape a couple times. I select this again, and I tell it to array. And I say move to last. What I'm defining is where that starts and stops. And the reason I only did 2 is I want to show you that I can always change that number, right? I can change 5, but what I'm not, well, Revit's smart enough to tell you shouldn't put a wall and a door in the same place, or a wall and a window in the same place. I'm never changing the start point and the end point at that if I said move to last. If I said move to second and I added 6, 7, 8, what would happen? My array would get longer, right? So it depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If I'm, say, laying out a classroom with chairs in it, come here. Let me just insert a piece. I don't know if we have any furniture loaded in this model yet, but let me see what we have. Oh, student desk. All right. So if I say I'm putting a desk in place, I probably want to define the space between each desk, just like the space between the desks in this room. So which array would I use? To second, right? Yeah. Absolutely. And then I would click on this and say, hey, I need 5 desks. And I need from there, I know that I need, say, 6 feet. And then it doesn't care if they fit in the room or not, right? It's just going to provide me all that space. If I had to fit them all in the room and then figure out how much space I could have between them, I'd define the first one and the last one and put between. The other thing that we can do is we can array an array. So if I select the whole array, and decide that I'm going to array that, move to second, say I need 3 of them. Now I have them arrayed in 2 directions. But I really have an array of this. And if I double click on that array, I can now edit what's in the array. So if I drew a circle, just for example, and I'm just going to do that with a detail line. Oh, it's not going to let me do a detail line. Isn't that nice? Let's say I put a dimension on here. And I finish that. It did not work the way I wanted it to. Alright. Let's say I change that. Okay. Instead of a desk, I'm going to make it a larger desk. So what happened? All the desks got larger. So array is actually a really useful tool when you're populating a lot of something that may change. Or it's a very useful tool to use for putting something as a placeholder, something very simple. Like you say you had a lot of Corinthian columns in your building and you modeled them as just a rectangular column because Corinthian columns have lots of faces, slow down your computer. You can later go in and insert into that array all that detail and it populates it across the whole project. So that is all the time we have for tonight's class, but hopefully you found going through the what you feel comfortable with and what you don't feel comfortable with as a useful task. What we'll do is we'll spend a few minutes each class tackling that list. Hopefully that will help clarify some of those issues for you. But the bottom line, like we talked about, is what? Use the software more. Don't worry about making mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. The more mistakes you make using the software, actually, the more you're going to learn about the software. All right, perfect. We'll see you guys on Thursday.